Part 2 begins not with raised voices but with the echo of what had already been said lingering in the chamber like unresolved thunder, because once a confrontation like that detonates, the real drama unfolds in the aftershock. The glances between aides, the tightened jawlines, the subtle recalculations happening behind composed expressions, and as the cameras continued rolling, what we witnessed was no longer just an exchange of accusations, but a battle over narrative control, a contest to define not only what happened years ago in connection to Jeffrey Epstein, but what accountability even means in the present moment. Jasmine Crockett leaned forward, not just physically but rhetorically, her follow-up tone sharpened by something deeper than partisanship. It felt like impatience with institutional amnesia, a refusal to allow the hearing to drift into sterile timelines and technical footnotes, while Pam Bondi maintained a posture that communicated discipline, as if to say that intensity alone does not override documented history, and this contrast, fire meeting granite, created a dynamic that was almost cinematic in its symbolism, because it wasn't merely about a case file from the past. It was about whether systems are capable of moral self-reflection or whether they instinctively default to self-preservation when challenged under bright lights. As Crockett pressed further, her strategy became clearer. She wasn't attempting to litigate every procedural detail of plea agreements or jurisdictional limits. She was interrogating the culture that allowed powerful figures to maneuver through legal gray zones with outcomes that left survivors feeling sidelined, and by repeatedly referencing the human impact rather than the paperwork trail, she reframed the conversation from a technical defense to a moral audit. There's a reason this resonates beyond a single hearing room, because the Epstein saga has evolved into a symbol of perceived elite insulation, a shorthand for a system that sometimes appears more fluent in damage control than in delivering catharsis, and Crockett's instinct tapped directly into that collective frustration. Bondi, for her part, responded by emphasizing scope and authority, underscoring the constraints of office and the boundaries that shape prosecutorial discretion, signaling that hindsight can distort the complexity of decisions made in real time, and from a legal perspective, that argument carries weight. Public officials operate within frameworks, not fantasies, but politically frameworks rarely soothe communities who feel wronged, and that tension is where the exchange found its raw electricity. What made the second phase of this confrontation even more compelling was the shift in body language across the room. You could sense colleagues recalibrating, some nodding subtly as Crockett spoke, others stiffening as Bondi articulated her defense, and in that choreography of reactions you could see the larger ideological divide taking shape. Is justice measured solely by whether statutes were followed, or is it also measured by whether the outcome satisfies a broader sense of fairness? Crockett's insistence on acknowledgement suggested that legality without empathy feels incomplete, while Bondi's insistence on context suggested that empathy without legal grounding risks becoming performative outrage, and neither position is trivial. The complexity lies in the fact that governance demands rules, yet democracy demands trust, and when trust erodes, even legally sound decisions can appear morally hollow. That's why this moment traveled far beyond the hearing itself. It wasn't just about Florida's past decisions, it was about the public's ongoing negotiation with institutions that are supposed to protect them. Another layer of intensity emerged in the subtext of power dynamics, because hearings are as much about optics as substance. Crockett, representing a newer generation of lawmakers unafraid to challenge established narratives, embodied a style that prioritizes confrontation over deference, while Bondi, seasoned and deliberate, embodied a style that relies on procedural authority and composure under fire. And when those styles collide, viewers instinctively take sides not only based on facts but on temperament. The digital age amplifies this effect. Short clips strip away nuance, isolating moments of raised eyebrows or pointed phrases, and those fragments shape perception more powerfully than full transcripts ever could. Crockett's critics may argue that emotion risks overshadowing nuance. Bondi's critics may argue that nuance risks overshadowing accountability. Both criticisms can coexist, and that's precisely what makes the exchange so layered. It resists simplistic villain-hero framing and instead exposes the friction inherent in public reckoning. As the questioning continued, the conversation drifted toward institutional lessons. What safeguards exist now? What transparency mechanisms have been strengthened? How oversight can prevent future controversies? And here the energy shifted from accusation to prevention, a subtle but crucial pivot. Crockett's tone, while still firm, suggested that acknowledgement is not only about revisiting the past, but about ensuring that similar blind spots don't persist. Bondi's responses emphasized reforms and procedural clarifications, framing the system as evolving rather than static. This evolution narrative is important because it acknowledges that institutions are not monoliths frozen in time. They adapt, sometimes slowly, often under pressure. Yet adaptation does not erase memory, and that's where Crockett's insistence retained its edge. Progress cannot be claimed without confronting the moments that necessitated it. In that sense, the hearing became a microcosm of how democracies wrestle with their own histories, balancing forward momentum with backward accountability. There was also an undercurrent of strategic positioning for broader audiences beyond the chamber. Lawmakers know that hearings serve dual purposes. They gather information, yes, but they also send signals to constituents. Crockett's approach signaled solidarity with those who feel marginalized by opaque deals and insider arrangements. Bondi's approach signaled steadiness to those who fear that retrospective outrage could destabilize institutional norms. Each spoke not only to each other but to millions watching, and that awareness subtly shaped their phrasing. It's a reminder that political confrontation is rarely spontaneous. It's calibrated, layered with intent, crafted for both immediate impact and long-term narrative positioning. The result is a spectacle that feels raw yet is deeply strategic, emotional yet meticulously constructed. Stepping back, my analysis is this. The power of that moment lies less in who won the exchange and more in what it exposed about the fragile contract between citizens and the justice system. When survivors are invoked, the moral temperature rises instantly because their stories anchor abstract policy in lived reality. When legal constraints are invoked, the conversation returns to structure and process because without them, governance collapses into chaos. The challenge, and perhaps the responsibility, of public officials is to bridge that divide rather than widen it. If acknowledgement is offered sincerely and process is explained transparently, trust has a chance to rebuild. If either side dismisses the other entirely, polarization deepens. So as you reflect on this unfolding drama, ask yourself, do you value emotional clarity over procedural defense? Or do you believe the rulebook must remain the ultimate referee even when outcomes feel unsatisfying? Share your perspective because these debates define not just headlines, but the evolving standard by which power is judged.